Everything old is new again. America's entertainment pop culture talk show.
It may well possess a rudimentary intelligence.
I'm trying to think, but nothing happens.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Hello, I'm Mr. Red.
Come on, Mark, like a job for me.
Where's the goodies? Leave the gun. Take the cannoli.
I bet you wouldn't have done anything like this if Mom and Dad were here.
You filthy criminal.
Excuse me while I whip this out.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Here are your hosts, Douglas Viviani and David Cohen.
The 2-1 pitch. There's a fly ball hit out to left. Waiting is Jones. The Mets are the world champions. Gary Koosman being mobbed. Look at this scene.
Welcome to Everything Old is New again. Douglas Viviani here. Sans David Cohen. Unfortunately, he cannot be here, but that's okay because he's a Yankees fan anyway. So I have a better co-host this week to celebrate the Mets with us. And listen, the bottom line is I'll tell you a little bit about myself in a minute in terms of my relationship with the Mets. And you listeners to Everything Old is New again know my story of my first autograph, which was a great experience back in 1972 when I got the autograph of Casey Stengel and didn't even know who he was later on to find out all of the history. But we'll get to that. That's the point is we're with Art Shamsky again, a favorite guest of ours. He's played right field, left field, first base from 65 to 72 for the Reds, the Mets, the Cubs, and the Oakland Athletics. He's an integral part, of course, as we know, of the 1969 World Champion Miracle Mets. He batted .300 with 14 home runs. Both was second on the team while platooning and then hitting .538 for the postseason, batting cleanup, which was, of course, so important. We last hosted Mr. Shamsky on our show to talk about his last book, After the Miracle, The Lasting Brotherhood of the Lasting Brotherhood of the 69 Mets. He's back on Everything Old is New again to share a small portion of this large amount of stories that is in his book, the new book, Met Stories I Only Tell My Friends, with a foreword by Howie Rose, and it is chock full. There's some great photos in there as well, but even if you, certainly if you are a Mets fan, it's a must. Even if you're not a Mets fan, we'll talk about why. There's so much more to this book than, so to speak, just talking about the Mets. So it's baseball and it's life, and it's a lot of fun. And Art Shamsky, thank you very much for coming back to Everything Old is New again.
It's great to be here, Doug. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, my pleasure. I saw the book was coming out, and I said, the first thing I said was, I've got to get back in touch. I've got to, well, I guess the first thing I said is I got to buy the book. Second thing I said was I've got to get Art back on the show to talk about it. And let's start with where you start on this book, which is a great way to start. You talk about Marty Appel. You talk about Ike, President Eisenhower, how they're kind of a book that is similar to this book in its structure, kind of influenced you to actually do this book, because you've written a number of books, and lots of people have written books, all wonderful books about the 69 Mets, which is such a magical season and so much fun to read about, especially if you were there, like, you know, alive and all that when I was, and most of our listeners were. But Art, tell us, what was the inspiration to this particular book?
Well, I've written, as you mentioned, Doug, 2 books before, and basically about the 69 Mets. The first one, The Magnificent Seasons, was really about 68, 69, when the Jets won the Super Bowl, we won the World Series, and the Knicks won the NBA championships. And the ironic thing about that book is that all 3 teams had never won before, and that's what made it so interesting. And of course, you put it in the backdrop of what was going on in the city and the country and the world at the time in the late 60s, and that's what really made that book special. And the second one, as you mentioned, After the Miracle, was really a 50th anniversary of the camaraderie that developed from that team. And basically it was because we were a bad team initially, and then go ahead and win a World Series, and the friendships that developed over the years. And I knew there was some interest in doing that. And, what's interesting about the Mets and that 69 team is that more books have been written about that team than any sports team in history. Perhaps the Yankees as an organization have had more books written about them, but a sports team, a team by itself, has never had more books written than the 69 Mets. And so when I decided to keep writing, and I was really looking for something to hang my hat on, so to speak, and somebody told me about this book that Dwight Eisenhower, when he was president, wrote, called At Ease, Stories I Only Tell My Friends. I looked at it, and it was interesting. And my friend Marty Appel spent many years as a Yankee PR person, wrote a book similar to something like this, but I got the inspiration. Said, my life had some interesting twists and turns, and maybe I can expand on some of the stories that have already been told about that '69 team, and things that maybe haven't angles of things that maybe people haven't heard about, and then talk about some things that I actually experienced with my teammates on and off the field. And that's really the whole crux of the whole book, just trying to make people look at it at a little bit different angle. And if I can get a smile out of people, then I feel like I've accomplished something. That's what I really tried to do.
And you do mention, of course, other teams and other players besides that were on the Mets as well. And I was going to start, I didn't think I would, but I think it's a good segue because time-wise, in '65, I think it was, you were with the Reds. Was it? Yeah, with the Reds, and Frank Robinson was on that team. Of course, a Hall of Famer, and I don't know. I think at that point in time, for sure, quite a shoe-in for Hall of Fame, even back then. At the very least, he was a very intimidating person, I would suggest, for someone that's just starting out. And then they put you in as a pinch hitter for him. He didn't want to go in as a pinch hitter. He's like, I'm not coming out. Then however it happened, they convinced him to do so. Well, tell us the story, what he had told you behind the scenes about that at that point and how that affected your relationship with him.
Well, when I came up with the Reds, they had a terrific team. We didn't win any World Series. There was one division in the National League back then, but of course, Rose was on that team. Pete, Tony Perez, Veda Pinson, Johnny Bench came in 1967, but it was the beginning of the Big Red Machine. And Frank was, behind Mays, Aaron, and Clemente. He was right there as one of the top players in not only baseball, the National League for sure. And I was calling him Mr. Robinson. I was so young. I was kind of intimidated by him. Really never spent much time with him, never talked to him too much. And Dick Sisler was our manager at the time, and we were beating the Mets of all teams. And back in those days, if you didn't win 2 out of 3 against the Mets, it was a bad series. He had got hit, and he got hit a lot because he stood right on top of the plate. And he got hit on a Friday night, and he wasn't one to stay out of a game. He was going to be playing no matter what. And the next day, we're winning the game again against the Mets. They brought in another pitcher to pitch to him, a guy named Tom Parsons. And we're already winning the game big, and he's on the on-deck circle waiting to hit. And Sisler kind of called my name out, and I did one of these kind of like, me? You want me to go hit for Frank Robinson? You're talking to me? The Robert De Niro thing from Taxi Driver. And he said, yeah, you go out there and hit. So I walk on the on-deck circle while the pitcher's warming up, and Frank looks up and, without saying exactly what he said, but you can picture this. He said, get out of here. There's no way you're hitting for me, and I'm very young, and I'm calling him Mr. Robinson. So kind of dragged the bat back to the dugout and didn't know what to say. And Sisler said, what are you doing? You're going to hit for him. He said, he doesn't want me to hit for him. He yelled out at Frank, and he told him, Frank, come on, your arm. We're winning. So I go back out, and Frank looks up and he says, whatever you do, do not embarrass me, which is the worst thing he could have said, because now I got so much more pressure on me. And even though we're winning the game big, I'm feeling like, please don't let me strike out. Let me hit that first pitch, pop it up, back to the pitcher. Just don't embarrass him. So make a long story short, the umpire saying, let's go, come on, let's go. And I'm walking around the catcher, and I get in the batter's box. I said, oh, please, let me hit that first pitch. And ironically, I hit the first pitch out of the ballpark and over the center field wall and Crosley Field, and I'm rounding the bases, and I'm saying, wow, thank you. Whoever was listening to me, thank you for that. And I got back to the dugout, and it was really nice. Everybody congratulated me. It was a meaningless home run because we're winning the game big, but at least Frank came up to me and he said, okay, now you can call me Frank.
There you go.
Like that.
There you go.
That was the story of that. And we became friends. And of course, we played against him in the World Series in 1969. It was another big challenge for all of us, but he was a great player and underrated in many ways. And of course, went on to become a manager in the big leagues. But what's funny about that winter, they traded him to Baltimore, saying that he was an old 30 at the time. And next year he won the Triple Crown for the Baltimore Orioles, which I thought was an ironic way to have that come to an end. But he was a great player to be around. I learned a lot from him. I used to watch him take batting practice, and he was one of these guys that when he took batting practice, he never tried to hit the ball out of the ballpark. He always worked on keeping that front shoulder closed. Tried to hit everything to the right side. He was a right-handed batter. tried to hit everything to the right side of the infield to make sure he kept that shoulder closed. And I watched him, really never talked to him too much about it, but I learned a lot about trying to be a better hitter from him. And back in those days, as you probably remember, even though you were very young, the National League had so many great players from Mays, Aaron, Clemente, Robinson, Billy Williams, Stargell, McCovey. I mean, the list goes on and on. And I was very lucky to play with and against those great stars in the 60s and 70s.
And we're going to learn more about that. And you can learn even more about what you're going to hear today from the book, Mets Stories I Only Tell My Friends. So now I guess we could say, let's be honest, we are all friends. If you buy the book, you're all going to be a friend. Can call yourself a friend of Art Shamsky. We'll be back right after this, and everything old's new again.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets.
Mets are amazing, 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 amazing. They're just finding out now that it's just October, and they found out now around the United States and all the patrons of New York City and Shea Stadium that they are amazing. They'll be amazing, amazing, amazing.
Welcome back to Everything Old is New Again. This is an amazing show because we have part of the amazing Mets, Art Shamsky, with us. And we're talking about his book, Mets Stories I Only Tell My Friend. It's out now. A nice forward by Howie Rose, who himself probably can write a book down the line and have a lot of stories himself. A fellow Honeymooners fan. We'll just throw that out there. He's always referencing the Honeymooners and so forth. But it's fun to be able to look back and hear stories. You talking about the players in the 60s and the 70s. You can, maybe I'm nuts, but I go back every so often. I get a kick out of, doing paperwork and putting on an old All-Star game, let's say, you can get now from YouTube or what have you. And the names and the people Willie Mays on the same lineup leading off or playing, and followed by Hank Aaron, followed by Frank Roberts. I mean, it's just amazing. You play with so many of them, one of which, there's so many to talk about, and I'll get to the Mets in a moment, but I'm so interested in Pete Rose. When he played, I hated that man for two reasons. Number one, he always played against the Mets, and it almost seemed like he never had a game without a hit, if not two. And number two, when I played baseball in high school and before in junior high school, all we ever heard was, you got to be like Charlie Hustle. You've got to run. You've got to run. And now that I coach my son, I'm a little older dad, but I coach my son, he's 12-year-olds. I'm saying the same thing, but they don't know who he is, which is the problem, because there's nobody that's come beyond him that's really Mr. Hustle. Does that make sense? How is that possible? But tell us a smidge if that rings any bells for you, or a story or whatever about Pete Rose.
Well, we started our careers together way back in 1960. Geneva, New York, which is a small town upstate New York on the Finger Lakes, New York Penn League. And Pete came in June. I was on a team with Tony Perez. And back in those days, most of the major league teams had had about 7, 8, 9 minor league teams. And the Reds had 2 Class D teams, which was the lowest classification at that time. There was one in Florida, in Palatka, Florida, and one in Geneva, New York. And the three of us were together, and Pete came in June. And we were a bad team. We were so bad as a team, we got the manager fired, believe it or not, in the middle of the season, and lowest classification of baseball you could be in. And when you saw Pete, he really couldn't play. They signed him. He was out of Cincinnati, local kid, and we became friends right away. We lived together in this house in Geneva, and we all became very good friends. But Pete really, the only thing he could do hard at that time, or I would do well that time, was run hard to first base. He was not a good hitter, not a good fielder. They didn't even know what position to play him. And the next year, they moved me up to Class B. I went to Topeka, Kansas. And then Pete went down to, I think it was Tampa, Florida. And he played for a guy who was very famous, Johnny Vandermeer, who pitched 2 back-to-back no-hitters. And they kept Tony back up in Geneva. So they moved me up to B and kept 2 of these guys. One's in the Hall of Fame now, and the other one should be back in Class D. So I guess at that point I was a better prospect. But he really couldn't do much well at that time. But then the next year, 1962, we were together in Macon, Georgia, of all places. That was the Sally League, and that was the Reds A team. And all of a sudden, his skill level had developed. They had done something that previous year to work on things, and he became a totally different ball player. And I think he led the league in hitting and was really developed his skill level. And the next year he went to spring training with the Reds, not even on the roster, but as an invited player, made the team. He beat out a guy at second base by the name of Don Blasingame, who played in the big leagues a long time, became rookie of the year. The rest is history. And then we were together when I got up to the big leagues. But we were still friends all those years. We rode those buses and station wagons together and became very good friends. I was at his first wedding, and we had great memories together. But I'm really happy that I was part of his life in the minor leagues growing up and spent some time in the big leagues with him, but turned out to be this great all-around player. And what's sad about this whole thing is the thing about the Hall of Fame now. 20 years ago, the needle was really pointing to most people did not want him to be in. And that needle has gone the other way now for various reasons, partly because the Hall of Fame has kind of gotten lax in a lot of the things that they allow now for players going in. But I think Pete has kind of grown on people, for lack of a better phrase. And there's still a percentage of people who don't want him to be in for the obvious gambling reasons. But I'll tell you this. I would venture to say that 99 and 9/10% of the people who don't want him in, who do not want him in, wish everybody played the game like he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sad part of it for me, because when I hear that, it's not because he didn't play well and he didn't entertain people. It's because of this side thing that people remember him by. And he's admitted he had a problem. If he would have come clean right away, he not only would have been in the Hall of Fame, he would have probably been managing a team and probably owning a team at this point. But he denied all this stuff, and that came back to haunt him. But he was a terrific player. If you get a chance, look up his records in the National League as just a general player and as a switch hitter. It's unbelievable. I think he was an all-star at 5 different positions, and it goes on. And he certainly deserves to be in it. Who knows what's going to happen?
He's got more hits than anybody else on the planet also. And my question is to you, if you know, and maybe it could be a good lesson for a kid listening here too, is you say he didn't have those skills. And I tell this to my kids all the time. It's not about all what you have in your pocket. It's what you show. I mean, he was able to work so hard, I'm assuming, at batting and fielding and so forth. He lived, breathed it, I assume. Maybe you'll tell me if you know. How the heck does he turn around from, as you're describing, not a good hitter to hitting more hits than anybody else on the planet?
Well, I wasn't with him that second year when he went down to Florida at Tampa. But I'm sure that he just determined that he was going to work on things. He was a switch hitter. He was going to work on things to make himself a better player. Because, again, if you would have seen him that first year, you would have said, he's not a prospect. The only reason he's here is because he's from Cincinnati and they signed him. But all of a sudden, when I was with him again the next year, in 1962, he had really changed. And he worked as hard, if not harder, than anybody on his game. And he wasn't satisfied with developing to a certain level. He wanted to get to the next level and the next level after that. And he had this great determination to be as good, or not, if not better, than people that were ahead of him, and then get to the big leagues and be an all-star all those years. And I think a lot of it was his own determination to be outgoing, brash, a typical, believe in himself kind of person. And he went by Tony, myself, pretty fast in terms of skill level. But then, of course, Tony went on to have that Hall of Fame career, Tony Perez.
Right.
But Pete was just a guy who worked so hard. And if you talk about the youngsters, about somebody that you should look at and understand that he didn't have the ability initially, but worked at it to get where he was, and then point out those records and all-star games that he made. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah, guy was amazing. Guy's unbelievable. Another quick short story, if we can, turning to the Mets. One of my favorites. One of the first autographs I ever got as a kid again. But I just love the guy, and you mentioned him in the book. Jerry Grody, who recently just passed as well, unfortunately. I had a story. I met Manny Sanguian in the center field or right field of Pittsburgh Stadium once. He had a place where he sold food there, and he was signing autographs, and I really said to him really quick, I said, I remember when Jerry Grody would play against you guys or other players in the league. And what was this about? If he didn't like, he did a lot of things that was very cool. But if he didn't like what the umpire was doing or calling a game, he'd call for a high pitch and he kind of would duck, and and the umpire would get the message. And Manny Sanguillen facetiously got mad at me and said, "Whoa, wait a minute! I used to do that in Puerto Rico. He stole that from me." So I don't know if you ever spoke to him about that or anything just in general. Give us a smidge of what you say about Jerry Grote, because he was a character on and off.
Let me start off by saying, in all the years I played, he was the best defensive catcher I ever played with or against. And that was the years of Johnny Bench. Johnny always said that if he was teammates with Jerry Grote, he'd probably become a third baseman. Jerry was such a good defensive catcher. But something happened to him when he got on the bus after we left the hotel. The trip to the ballpark was the beginning, was the stirring of the anger. And he'd get to the ballpark and his whole personality would change. And he was great to be with off the field. But once that got in the uniform at the ballpark, his whole personality changed. And opposing players hated him. I remember when he was catching Lou Brock, all those famous, the base runners back in those days, Maury Wills and Brock and some of those guys, they hated him. They would scream at him and get on first base. We're going. You're not going to get us. We wanted back and forth as banter. But he was a terrific player and a good teammate. He just was a guy that once the ball game started or once you got to the ballpark, his whole personality changed, and we all could see it. I mean, we knew it, but he was a terrific catcher. I mean, as good as anybody in baseball. I don't know if people will remember the series back in the 70s when they played the Yankees in the World Series. He was with the Dodgers back then, and he made some great plays in those World Series back there. He was great with pop-ups, handling pitchers, balls topped in front of the plate. He was just a great defensive catcher and a pretty good hitter. But personality-wise, he hated the writers for whatever reason. Somebody must have wrote a bad article about him or something, and never gave the writers any insight that they wanted from the game. They'd always say to him, "Well, you were out there. You saw the game. Come on. What do you?" I used to dress next to him, and writers would come in. "Hey, Jerry, what about that 3-2 pitch that Seaver made in the 7th inning?" He said, "Well, you were there. You saw it. There's nothing more I could tell you about it." So they didn't like him, and I think that hurt him in the long run because they certainly could have written some great stuff about him, at least as a defensive catcher.
Yeah, I loved them. And Lindsey Nelson, Bob Murphy, and Ralph Connie used to announce all of the positives all the time about him, and you could see it. And we'll be back. Unfortunately, I have to take a break again here and talk more Mets and all kinds of baseball with Art Shamsky, talking about his book, Mets Stories I Only Tell My Friends. Welcome to the club, Art Shamsky. We're back right this.
Well, look who's assembling on our stage. Here they are, ladies and gentlemen. Champion Mets singing "You've Gotta Have Heart." So let's have a fine.
Ron Swoboda was the last base hit, the biggest one you ever got in your life.
Well, we've come so far so fast. I think nothing can really be said. You know it, Lindsey. You know it because it brought us here. It was only one of the things. There were so many things.
Ron, you got the magic glove back. You got it all back.
He can pick it.
He can pick it. Can he pick it?
Hi, everybody. This is Ron Swoboda of the 1969 Miracle Mets, author of Here's the Catch, a memoir of the Miracle Mets and more. And you're listening to Everything Old is New Again.
There we go. It's great to be back here with Art Shamsky, fellow teammates and champion with and of Ron Swoboda. We're talking about the book Mets Stories I Only Tell My Friends. It's out now. It's a great book. It's a great easy book too. I love because you can take this out at any time and read it for if you've got doing something for 5-10 minutes. You could read a whole story or 2 or 3, get a laugh and a smile or learn something and move on. Or you could sit and read it for 3 hours. I would suggest not reading it for 3 hours because you're going to have so many stories. It's fun to reminisce, especially if you know the players, to reminisce a little in your mind and then go back to it and get another story. You don't want to, they all meld into one otherwise, It's just such a great book. There's great stories. I want to finish about Grote just for a minute, what I observed, and you tell me if your players noticed this. I'm assuming they did. Except for Koosman and Seaver, when the pitchers were having a bad day or not throwing the ball where he wanted to throw it, he'd whip it back, and I'm going to be facetious, but like at 90 miles an hour back to them as well, number one. And what I loved, and I lost, Art, is strike three ending the inning. If the opposition team was coming from the dugout to the left, he'd roll the ball to the right of the mound, so that pitcher had to walk 2, 3, 4 steps more to get the ball and come back just to wear him out or bother him, whatever. Tell me what you think of those.
Yeah, no, he did that. He did that, and you mentioned firing the ball back. Some of those pitchers, they'd throw to home plate and they'd back up as soon as they did that because he was going to fire it back to them as harder than they threw it to him. But he was just I don't know what the right word is. Character, yes, but he just was an antagonistic kind of person. He would roll that ball if they were coming from first base. He would roll it on the third base side of the mound. If they were coming from third base, the visiting team would roll it to the first base side. And you're right. He was just 4 or 5 steps more. The pitcher had to pick it up. And back in those days, they weren't throwing every pitch out, like they do it now. But they were using these balls over and over again. And so he would just do things to aggravate. And I guess he felt like that was one way to stimulate his ability in the game. But maybe he was just an antagonistic kind of guy. But he was a great catcher and a good teammate. We were friends for a long time, and again, he passed away last year too. One of the 5 that went away, and it was tough. But all our lives changed that October day when we won the World Series. For me, on a personal level, I've done so many things and been still in New York because of it, and was able to write these books. And it's interesting. I tell people that there's 2 teams in the history of baseball that I really believe resonate with fans years after they won, and one of them is going to be 100 years in a couple of years, and that's the 27 Yankees with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and that cast of characters they had. And you'd still talk about that team because it's historic and it's got those names on it. And the other team is the 69 Mets. And we're now talking 50-something years later, and we still talk about the 69 Mets. And what's amazing to me is that wherever I go, I meet people. I do a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of personal appearances. I meet a lot of kids, a lot of young people, I should say, who weren't even born, who know about that team from their parents and their grandparents. And they are so in tune to it. And I get so many people coming up to me just saying, thank you. Thank you for making our life a little bit better at a time that we were going through an awful time financially, spiritually, morally. The war in Vietnam was tearing the country apart. And to me, that's what it's all about. I feel if we've made some people feel better about their lives in some small way, then we've accomplished something. And I get that all the time. I between here and Florida, where I live, there's between New York and Florida, I speak at a lot of places and a lot of older people. And what I see is that when I get out there and talk, and all of a sudden, most of these people probably are in their 60s and 70s, some even a little bit older. All of a sudden, I've got them for about an hour and a half, and their youth comes back. Yeah. They start thinking about when they went to the ballpark with their parents or their grandparents. And then they started thinking about when they took their kids or their grandkids. And it makes them feel young. And even though they might have been there or they might not have been there, they know what happened. And they feel like they're part of it. And now they're young again for an hour or so. And it makes me feel young, too. It keeps me going. But I find that there's so much joy in remembering that team because it was a time of kind of innocence in a sense, even though we were going through an awful time in the world and the country. But we made people feel better about their lives, and they passed that on from generation to generation. And to me, like I said, once you have that knowledge that you've made somebody feel better about their life, then I think you've accomplished something in your life.
100%. To be able to have been able to do that and win, you tip your cap a number of times to Gil Hodges, your manager. I'm going to play with something real quick. It's the 1955 World Series. Gil Hodges here.
Now Gil is set, and so is Tommy Byrne. The Yankee pitcher checks his runner at third, Campanella. Delivers 1 and 2 to the plate to Hodges. Fastball swung on, hit out into left field. It's in for a base hit. Roy Campanella comes on to score, and the Brooks lead it 1-0.
All right, so that's one of the 2 RBIs that Gil Hodges had in Game 7 of 1955 World Series, where the Brooklyn Dodgers won their only championship as the Brooklyn Dodgers. That's the gentleman that you knew. That's the gentleman in your mind, the hero that you had as you walk into the dugout or the clubhouse for the first time. And as I am with you, so to speak, on a different level, the respect and the admiration of, oh my goodness, I'm speaking to somebody that I admired for all these years. It comes to light. Tell us a smidge, because you talk about it in the book so well, about how he changed the team, but also how you first met him and how that experience was all about. Because we did this with Ron Swoboda, and Ron had a different experience. He certainly respected him, but he had some. He was at odds a little bit with him quite a number of times. Maybe you could talk about your experience with him.
Well, you were right. I watched him as a kid growing up in St. Louis when he was with those Dodger teams, and I was in awe of all those great players who played in baseball, and those Dodger teams that were fighting the Yankees to win World Series and only won the one in '55 that I remember that and Gil was part of. But when I got traded over to the Mets, I really didn't know him and really didn't know many guys at all. And I remember the first day in spring training, and he had this meeting, and he said, all right, and here's this guy that's this big, strong, and he wasn't that tall, but you could see that he was a no-nonsense person. He said, I just want you guys to know you will not be the same old Mets that you've been in the past. Well, I wasn't with the team in the past. You just, like I said, if you didn't beat them 2 out of 3, it was a bad series. So I'm thinking, oh, this is somebody you do not want to mess with. And he started to believe, or started us to believing in that you've got to play the game differently. And he was right. And even though we finished 9th, a half game out of last place in 68, there was only 1 division. Then we went to 2 divisions in 69. You could see that his idea of baseball was starting to blend in. And even though we didn't play that great, he was a no-nonsense person that you did not want to mess with, more or less. And the next spring, we had another meeting, and he said, okay, I want you guys to know. And that whole time in 68, I was there, probably said hello or goodbye to him maybe twice, 3 times. We never really conversed much, but I had this utmost respect for him. But so next spring, he has a meeting, and he said, I did some record searching, and you guys lost 30-something games by 1 run. You know how to lose games. You just don't know how to win games. So we got to find ways to win. Now, this is spring training before we win the World Series. And even though we started the season kind of mediocre, all the way into June, we were not playing great. But he was exactly right. We didn't know how to win a close game, whether it be 10-9 or 8-7, 5-4. We had good pitching, of course, with Seaver and Koosman and Gentry and McGraw and Ryan. And, we had the basis and good defense, but we were not finding ways to win. And this was Gil's strength and his genius, is trying to understand or trying to make us understand that we just have to find ways to win games. And all of a sudden it clicked in the summer, where we started to find these ways to win, and everybody contributed on the team. Everybody on the whole bench contributed to the success of the team. And that was really Gil's strength in making us understand that how to win ball games. And I had the utmost respect for him. I avoided him as much as possible, to be perfectly honest, which I talk about in the book. Yeah. When we got on that field, we all knew that, basically knew when we were going to play, when we weren't going to play. And we knew what Gil's thought process was. And he was really the catalyst in us winning. And there's no doubt in my mind the Mets would have won more World Series if he would have lived longer. But he was a great manager, and I have the utmost respect for him. But there's a couple stories in the book that I didn't write about because Mrs. Hodges was still around, and there was one incident with his son. We went out one night in Los Angeles that took his son out reluctantly, I must say. He kind of tagged on with myself and Kenny Boswell, and I never wrote about it or talked about it. It's just exactly what the book was about, these Met stories that I would only tell my friends.
Right. Well, we'll try to dig into that story and more when we get back right here on Everything Old Is New Again. It's easy to remember because we're all friends with Art Shamsky now. As long as you buy the book, Met Stories. I only tell my friends.
Knocking those home runs over.
At Schaefer, we brew our beer to taste great every time.
More Schaefer. AG's buying.
Again? How about last year?
You know, guys, we haven't lost it.
No, sir. The amazing Mets are still,
amazing.
Amazing. So come into the Schaefer Circle.
Welcome back here. Everything old is new again. We're here with Art Shamsky. That was a commercial from back in the day with Tommy Agee. And let's see, George Shamsky was in there, Ron Swoboda, Gary Gentry, Ed Charles was there, celebrating and continuing to celebrate the big victory in '69 and thereafter. We're here with Art Shamsky. Now, talk about celebrations and those fellas. I know Swoboda and Tug McGraw are sort of like, and even Jerry Koosman, I think you mentioned in the book, are sort of cut-ups or kind of light-hearted gentlemen, and we've come to know them as that for sure. Question is now that you had that juxtaposed to Gil Hodges, who was so two different types of personalities on a winning team. How did they stay away like you did, or what, did they catch a little guff from Gil Hodges?
Well, he would at times be, I don't know how to express it, but
yeah.
he was a very tough ex-Marine, hard-nosed, but I think he was fair. But he had a great coaching staff. He had Rube Walker, who was really kind of his pitching coach, and sat next to him in the dugout. And of course, he had Eddie Yost at third, Joe Pignatano in right, and Yogi Berra was our first base coach. A lot of people forget that Yogi won another World Series ring with us. And I like to tell the story that when I got over to the Mets, and I'm so happy to meet Yogi because I'm from St. Louis. Yogi was from St. Louis, and when I first met him, he had no idea who I was, couldn't pronounce my name, and really never really had interacted with me. But I was also told that he was our hitting coach. And I can honestly tell people over the years that I was there, never once did Yogi ever talk to us about hitting. And he was our hitting coach. And one day I said to him, Yogi, I'm struggling. What should I do? And he said, well, just see it and hit it. And that was it. So I tell people that story. They just smile and laugh. But we had a great coaching staff, and Gil was a man of few words, but you got to know sort of the preemptive moves that he might make. But I'm proud of having been part of knowing him and being part of that team, because even though I didn't have a lot of conversations with him over the years, we had arm's length conversations, I would say, relationship. But I kind of could read his mind at times and knew certain things about him. But I tell people I avoid him as much as possible. It just seemed to me that that was the best way to survive in this situation.
And listen, Cleon Jones had to avoid him, or could not avoid him, I should say, at one occasion that you mentioned in the book. And again, the book is Mets Stories I Only Tell My Friends by Art Shamsky. You can get it on his website, artshamsky.com, correct?
You can, and you'll get an autograph if you get it on my website. And I'll be around at various places that, I'm sure you can get it from Amazon and from bookstores and Borders and things, not Borders, but Barnes and Nobles and in various places. But if they want one, fans want one with an autograph, they can go to my website, artshamsky.com.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Get the autograph. It's well worth it. It also then inspires someone to say, oh, you met him or you got to meet him, and you could say, well, I bought it from the website. And how'd you hear about it? From Everything Old is New Again. There's a great interview there, and it just permeates, because these three books that Art Shamsky wrote are so much fun. That's the point of it. That's what we do the show for. It's fun. The man brings stories that you're not going to hear anywhere else to this book, and it's a 55-year-old topic, right? And it's still brand new information, because we're and weren't Art's friends, but we are now. And I'm telling you, he tells stories about Tom Seaver. Well, put it this way, Seaver. Well, let me back up. Grody we spoke about for a moment, but Grody must have gotten along well, maybe, with Gil Hodges. I don't know. It seems like they sort of had parallel personalities, at least on the field. You tell me. Do you know?
I think Doug, most of the players got to the point where Gil was pretty predictable in a sense that he knew when you were going to play and maybe weren't in the starting lineup. But I think I would. I can't speak for all the other players,
right?
But, I think some players had closer relationships than others. I think some of us we respected the man, and we appreciated what he did for us as ball players and what he did did as a manager and a player. But I talk about in the book as an example of when he tried to convert me to first base a little bit, he would hit me ground balls. And Gil was not a person that was going to hit you soft ground balls. He wanted to kill you.
And he still could. I mean, this is a Hall of. He's a Hall of Famer now. He is a Hall of Famer now, right? So I mean, he's a Hall of Famer cracking balls to it. He was probably late 50s, right?
And he'd bounce, and he would sometimes. I actually think he was hoping for a bad hop sometimes. I'm lucky he didn't get me in my face, my nose, but he'd bounce them off my shins, and he'd love it. He'd laugh at it. Well, you won't make that mistake again, kind of thing. But when it was over, whatever he did for me added to my ability, and I can't thank him enough. But he was one of these kind of guys that you played for that you didn't have to have a lot of conversation with.
Right.
There was no need for him to pat you on the back when you did something good, or when you didn't mess up, or you did mess up. He would let you know through a short conversation, or certainly not embarrass you in front of the other teammates.
Yeah.
But
sounds like he was an amazing guy in terms of as a leader, and it's a great message also for Little League and whatever, any of the coaching and stuff that I do and other people do. In between the lines, let's be serious. We're going to goof around a little bit outside, but in between the lines, we're only here for, let's say, an hour basketball practice. Let's practice basketball. Let's not, do other things. And I think that's a great message for anything. He really set the, like I say, he set the tone. Doesn't mean that you fellas in the clubhouse didn't have a lot of fun. But it did mean that while you're on that field practicing or playing, you're practicing or playing. You're not still continuing with the jokes, so to speak, right?
No. You constantly practice.
Yeah.
It's a little different now in the game today.
Yeah,
You were taking infield practice, fly ball practice all the time. You worked on skills, but I think again, Gil was a huge power guy and home run hitter. Really believed in small ball. You find ways to win games. You sacrifice yourself if you have to move a runner over. And here's the thing about it: we all bought into it.
Mm-hmm.
We bought into this situation where we believed, and I think that was the brilliance of Gil. I tell people this, and they sometimes believe it, and sometimes they don't. But the reality of it is, he platooned in 4 positions and sometimes 5 positions when we won. And he got the most out of it, for example, myself and Ron Swoboda in right field. But the bottom line is it worked, and we pulled for each other, and it was a great experience. But the bottom line was it hurt our careers.
Yeah.
And we all knew that. We heard it in the long run. It hurt our careers, and because you get labeled. And Ronnie and I dealt with it, and I'm sure Ed Charles and Wayne Garrett dealt with it, and Al Weiss and Boswell dealt with it. But in Ronnie's case, in my case, we never really had much conversation, but we both knew that we had to pull for each other, which we did. But in the long run, it hurt us, and so. But it doesn't make any difference at this point to be part of that '69 team for me. I played 13 years, and really nobody talks about the other 12. It's really about 1969.
Right. I've never really heard anyone say anything, and there's so many books, right? I've never heard anyone say anything negative about each other in any of these '69 Met books.
What's interesting about that team, Doug, and when I talk about the 2 teams the Mets won over their history, and the '86 team was a terrific team, great players. And come from behind team. They came from behind the whole post game, but they were expected to win. They had come off a year in '85 where they were really competitive, and people expected them to win. Where we in 1968 were a bad team, finished 9th, a half game out of last place. Nobody expected us to win, and so I think part of the camaraderie that you talk about is the fact that we lost. And even though I wasn't there in those early years, '68 was a pretty good example of finishing almost last and losing a lot of close games. But by doing that and then winning the World Series the next year, it made that accomplishment so much better. And I think all of us who were part of that team appreciated it, and we fed off that our whole lives to be part of that team. And then even guys who weren't well known, I've always told them in private conversations, whatever happens to you in your life, you're going to be known as being part of that '69 Met team, the Miracle Mets. That in itself, to me, is unbelievable. And so I think all of us felt that being part of that team was so special. And the things that have happened to me on a personal level afterwards, you can't even imagine. I mean, all the shows we did, they named the dog after me, and Everybody Loves Raymond.
Right.
I mean, Eddie Kriempel and I did Sesame Street when it went off the ground. We were in uniform. I mean, we did, of course, singing on national television with Ed Sullivan, and then they took 7 of us to Vegas to sing for 2 weeks in Vegas to make fools of ourselves, and all these things that happened to us were because we were part of that team.
Right.
There's no other reason. I mean, and so that has been passed on from generation to generation, and I'm so proud to be part of it. And that's when I meet people. You know, it's interesting. There's 2 things that if I can mention real quick about how people relate to that team. Over the years, I must have had 100,000 people tell me they were at the final game, October 16th, 1969. And I say to myself, you know, well, the ballpark held about 53,000. So that means 40-something thousand people weren't there.
Right.
But in their mind, if they were there, that's fine. I just go along with it.
And all of this is in the book. We're lucky to have this book. Jerry Koosman tells us, Mets stories, I only tell my friends, of course, that's the name of the book, not only adds some clarity to past Mets stories in Art's playing and post-baseball career, but the book also has never-told insights and interesting new stories. I'm so glad I was part of it, and that is a great send-off, so to speak. That's a great way to describe this book, Mets stories, I only tell my friends, artshamsky.com. artshamsky.com. Pick up a signed copy. You'll not be sorry. It's great reading, great fun. And Art Shamsky, thank you so much for spending so much time with us here, and Everything Old is New Again.
Thank you, Doug. Great job. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Well, I will see you in Huntington, whatever it is, next week, the week after, that certain date.
Sounds great.
All right, have a great day. It's a pleasure to see you and hear from you again. I'm looking forward to the next one. Keep going. All right, we'll be back next week on Everything Old is New Again. Come on back.
Oh, the butcher and the